Okay, so we had a technical glitch, something blew up. I'm gonna put it here, but the students are gonna get the PowerPoints anyway. So, so as we were talking about before the overhead blew up, the Affordable Care Act. So I'm not here to address whether it's overall a social good or a social not good, the level of debt that it's going to get into, what it's going to do to the American economy, what it's going to do to American healthcare. Because the fact of the matter, it's too early to know, right? We're not really going to know the effects of the Affordable Care Act for a long time. Depending on the next presidential administration, they could change it, they could revise it. That's not the point. In theory, systems like the Affordable Care Act are designed to, right, for the proponents of this type of health care access, they're designed to make us a less unfair society, right? Why would we, what other models can we look at around the world that at least attempt to do what the Affordable Care Act is doing? Where else in the world?
Sweden, the Nordic countries.
Yeah, Northern and Scandinavian countries.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, no, Nordic, Scandinavian, and they call it universal health care, right? Now here in the United States, we're far away from, we can kid ourselves. The Affordable Care Act is not universal health care. That's a single payer system where every individual pays into equally to make everybody that can pay pays into a system equally to provide health care for everybody. One of the things that we are starting to see in the United States, two things. Healthcare is getting expensive for people that can't afford it. If you can afford healthcare and you were paying for it before, you're still paying for it. You're just paying a little bit more. But we're also seeing that a lot of people that were not covered are getting covered, right? You don't have to agree with that idea. I don't expect you to agree with that idea. But the fundamental premise is to make this a more fair society. The authors of this book are clearly behind this model, right? Because the idea for them is that healthcare access, issues of mental health happen within a social context. Okay, so let's throw out some ideas that have to do with specifics that are brought up in terms of concepts that are used in mental health research. So the first one is simply stress, right? The idea of stress. In your mind, when I say the word stress, what do you think we're talking about? How can we conceptualize stress sociologically? How can you conceptualize stress?
Are you talking about event?
Yeah, it could be an event. Could be an event. What other stresses are there? What other social stressors might people experience?
Pressure.
What do you mean? What kind of pressure?
The demands of today's society, especially in the workforce.
Demands of today's society, particularly in the workforce. Give me some specific examples. I like that.
Like if someone was working, for some sort of a business and they have a deadline, a timeline to present something,
Okay.
or to do something that has to be, brought into, just something they have to put forward, they're on a time crunch and they don't have the resources, or,
Okay.
they're unable to develop. So.
You sound like a graduate student. Yeah, right? Pressures that people feel, timelines, expectations at work. Do you have the resources to get done what you're supposed to get done? So people experience, so I would say that stresses are, the way that we're thinking and the way that the book is conceptualizing stress, it's external to individuals. It's outside of us. It's something in the social environment. Often people use the word exogenous. It's exogenous to the extent that it's outside of individuals, and it's going to put some unexpected, unwarranted stress on individuals, right? Once we feel that stress, whenever we feel stress, what is it that we inevitably do or should be doing? What is an outcome? What do we tend to do? You stress. You're graduate students. You're under great deals of stress. What's the word we use for what you do with that stress?
Cope with it.
We cope, right? So the opposite of stress is coping. And we think about ways that we cope with stress, right? And one of the things that happens in the mental health research and that we're often looking at is positive and negative coping. Positive and negative coping. So let's go back to your work idea, right? That you're under great deals of stress, external stress, deadlines, things that you're supposed to do, and you feel that stress. Now that stress is coming external to you. It's coming from it's from some social force is impacting your stress. What do you think starts to happen to your body? What do you think starts happening to your body as you feel that stress?
It can't fight it, starts to fall apart.
So let's be more specific. I mean, we're not a bunch of medical doctors, we're guessing here, but I want you to tell us,
Just get tired.
how about
Not enough
exhaustion?
Sleep. Yeah.
Oh boy, so
Probably
here we
not
go.
drinking enough water. so
Whoa,
alcoholics.
look at all that. Once you open the door, right, they start.
Different ways of just coping with it.
But no, before you cope, you feel the stress, and the stress does things to you. It's harder to sleep.
Cause you to overeat,
Some
not-
people overeat. Some people.
Stomach issues
Drink.
even.
Oh my gosh, right? Intestinal issues. Your heart rate is affected, right? Your heart rate may go in your blood pressure may go in different directions, right? So all these physiological things start to happen. And those in turn may impact, and often do impact, our mental health. So we may start feeling higher levels of things like anxiety, right? We may start feeling higher levels of anxiety. We may start to feel higher levels of depression, right? Because now we're depressed and now we're anxious, right? The word is, what is that word, Reed? Comorbid, right? Comorbid,
Oh, yeah.
right? So if you have stresses, the stresses lead to these kind of symptoms. The book uses the word symptomology. The symptomology is how can we empirically assess the characteristics that tell us somebody is experiencing some sort of a psychological distress, right? And the other word that is often used is that the symptoms are often comorbid. Typically, when you have depression, you often have something else that goes along with the depression. You may have anxiety, right? Often with people that experience ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorders, there's also a strong comorbidity with ADHD and depression, right? People think that people with ADHD are all wired all the time. That's a different animal altogether. One thing we know about people with ADHD is they tend to sleep a lot, right? They tend to want to sleep long stretches, particularly on weekends, right? Weekends when they don't have to be in a position where they're working. They may sleep very long stretches of time, particularly when the ADHD is comorbid with what? Depression. Because high levels of depression are often associated with these sleeping patterns, where you may not sleep for 2 or 3 days, but then you're going to fall into a long bout of sleeping. So that's one of the things to think about when we look at how stress comes from an external source, has symptomologies, and then let's get back to this notion of coping. When you guys have a super stressful week, how might you cope with it? Exercise, all right? Some people might exercise. Is that a positive or a negative?
Positive.
Yeah, that's probably a positive way, right? Exercise. Exercise, potentially a positive way to cope with stress. Is it possible that exercise can move to be a negative? Sure, it probably can. If